Great. Thank you so much for everyone coming in. As you saw in the chat box where you're from, we are here from all across the United States, as well as I saw Beijing, China is here tonight, and that would be tomorrow already there. So we got people from all over the world, which is really, really exciting, and I'm just thrilled that you're all here. We're also recording this, and you will get a recorded version coming back out to you very shortly after the webinar concludes. So for those of you who have not met me, I haven't had a chance to work with English Learner Portal officially yet. My name is Beth Skelton, and it is just an honor to be part of the team and collaborate with Kelly on this webinar. So just a little bit about me and my background. I am currently a full-time presenter, coach, and consultant. I am in schools a lot. Yesterday, I spent the whole day masked up face-to-face in a school here in Western Colorado that is in session face-to-face. I know that's not the case all over the world, but I did get that opportunity. I've been online, like many of us, since March. My positionality, I originally started as a German teacher, high school German. I went to Colorado College, and that's where I started with language acquisition and language learning way back in the 80s. Then I went on and got my master's in TESOL at the University of New Mexico. And in the meantime, I have worked with pre-K through adult English language learners. I've had experience across that age span, but the majority of my time in schools with my own classes was in the 6th through 12th grade group. So that's where most of our long-term English learners, by definition, that's where they are found, is in that 6th grade, 5th grade, and up category. And so a lot of what I'm bringing you tonight is experience, but also the latest research and background that we know on our long-term English learners. The last time that I worked full-time in a school was at the Bavarian International School outside of Munich, Germany, where I was the K-12 EAL, or English as an Additional Language Coordinator, but also focused on teaching 7th through 12th grade. And many of the students in the international system, as many of you know, are long-term learners, even though we don't necessarily use that term in the international school system. I've also published some books, mostly focused on secondary and adult language learners in the United States, new immigrants, and it's a story-based curriculum for meeting basic needs like shopping and going to a restaurant and visiting the doctor. So it's that kind of curriculum, and it's story-based, and has been translated into 4 languages, which is kind of fun. So what I just did there as my introduction, you can see is all visuals. This is one of the first strategies that I'm going to introduce in this session. And that strategy is simply a visual introduction. So how does that work in a content class or a class where you are specifically teaching language development for our long-term learners? Well, let's look at an example. Let's say you're talking about current events, or you're in a social studies class. You might post this picture that just recently came from the newspaper and have students build background from it, talk about it, why they have masks on, what the Black Lives Matter sign means. They're going to talk with their partners about it. So you're building background knowledge, you're building interest, and this is a great way to get into content before the text. And so the text obviously is going to be about this topic. Here's one for science. Before you explain the food web in a middle school science class, you might have them look at one and tell you what they can figure out and know already about just using the visual. So key terms are already in the visual, and that's going to build the vocabulary and background knowledge before they hit the text. In English language arts, before you start a book like this one, I can highly recommend, Efren Divided, you might take a look at the cover and see what you can gather from the cover, like why is the shadow 2 people and the actual person only 1, and start making predictions before you ever get in it. You know, it's like the elementary picture walk, but it's with a book that you might be starting in your class. And then finally in math, you might show a graphic. And if you look at this graphic closely, you'll notice it is about our long-term learners. Look at the far right green graphic bar. This is the graduation rate of long-term English learners in the state of Arizona in the United States in 2014. And look how it compares to new English learners. So this is one of the reasons why long-term English learners has come to our attention. And that's where we're going to go tonight, is to focus on that subgroup of students. So your first kind of strategy that many of you were asking about before the webinar was concrete strategies, and introducing your text or content through a visual is one of those strategies. Our objectives tonight in content are simply that you are going to understand who is classified as a long-term English learner. And you will also learn to apply the ABCs of working with long-term English learners in a face-to-face or virtual classroom. Now, those ABCs are really big, and I'm going to give you one concrete strategy for an A, the B, and the C. So you'll have 3 concrete strategies, well, and the introductory one, before you leave tonight. Our language objectives tonight are to describe the characteristics of LTELs with an adjective or phrase in the chat box, and to ask and answer questions. And we're also using the chat box for that. You'll notice that there are little icons next to content objective and language objective. This is actually another strategy, and that is a cueing strategy. So anytime you have something that's repetitive that comes up, you can grab an icon. These happen to come from the Noun Project. These icons from the Noun Project are free, and it is a fabulous source for all things ELL, and I love these icons. You can also teach your students to use the Noun Project in their presentations so that they have visuals for it. It also helps them with their learning. So another tip, the Noun Project, if you're not familiar with it already. Let's take a look then at who our long-term English learners are. This term, long-term English learner, in the research came out in the late 90s, but the definition has been developing. We heard more about them in the early 2000s with the No Child Left Behind Act. And then in the United States, we heard even more about them with the Every Student Succeeds Act. For those of you outside of the United States, these are education laws. And the latest is the 2015 education law, Every Student Succeeds. And in 2015, they didn't use the term long-term English learner, but they described the group that our state agencies and our educational agencies have to report on. And this is the definition they used. English language learners who have not attained English language proficiency based on annual English language proficiency assessment within 5 years of initial classification as an English language learner and their first enrollment in the local education agency, meaning school. Oh, that's a lot of words, of course, because it's government. So if you had to take all those words and put them into a short phrase, who are long-term English learners according to this federal law in the United States, Every Student Succeeds, what could you say? Let me give you a moment to just gather your thoughts. Who are these students? The way I abbreviated it is simply students who have had 6 or more years classified as an English language learner. Now, that classification, and many of you in your questions came up with it, like maybe they're just long-term English learners because of the test. Well, that's how they're classified, right? But you're right in questioning it. Because according to the research that Jim Cummins, Steve Krashen, many of the biggies in the field have done over the years, is that we know to acquire academic English at grade level may take some students up to 10 years. And here they're saying, if you don't test out or become outside classified within 5 years, we're going to classify you as long-term. So it could be that they're on the trajectory, they are improving and gaining every year, they just need longer. So it is possible that that is one reason why we have our long-term English learners. But there are other reasons, and we're going to look at that at the very end because of your questions. But what I'd like to address is then, all right, how do we work with students that have been in the system a long time? what do we do about it? So I just wanted to clarify that this is really all we have as a definition. But unfortunately, the LTEL label has become shorthand for some of these characteristics. I'd like you now to do something I'm going to call a chat blast. And what that means is that in the chat box, I'm going to have you type words or phrases that describe your LTELs, or words and phrases that you've heard describing LTELs, but don't hit return yet. This gives everybody a chance to type words and phrases that you've heard as a description of LTELs. Type those please in the chat box, but don't hit return yet. All right, it's about time. 1, 2, when I say 3, not yet. When I say 3, just go ahead and hit return and we're gonna see what we've got. Go. Wow, check it out. Check it out. This is why you will not see a slide with these words and phrases. If you look at what's coming up in the chat box, it's what I would call deficit language. It's words like weak, struggling, frustrated, poverty, marginalized. We have lots more: stalled, lazy, slife, low, unmotivated, right? And that's why I did a chat blast. This is actually a virtual strategy that you can use. So if one person types into the chat and they take your word or phrase, we tend not to type in the chat. Like, oh yeah, they already got it. But if I say, hold on, don't hit the blast, do the chat blast, hold on, and then everybody press at the same time, everybody has a chance. It's like wait time for the chat box. So I didn't want to have a slide on this because this is generally the shorthand. These are the terms that we are seeing around our English language learners who have been in the system a long time. And there are many characteristics that are now, when we say LTEL, that's what we're thinking. I'd like to shift that thinking to asset-based tonight. LTELs have so many assets that they're bringing, and keeping in mind that they may have this classification simply because they are growing at a slower pace than what the state or federal government or whoever has determined it says they need to be growing. So with that in mind, here's some asset-based characteristics that we can say for the majority of our long-term English learners, is that the majority of them are bilingual or multilingual. And I'm using the definition of bilingual that Maneka Brooks uses in her book, Transforming Literacy for Long-Term English Learners, and that is the ability to use 2 or more languages for multilingual in different settings for different purposes. Wow. Isn't that a nice definition? That means that I am trilingual because I can speak German in different situations for different purposes, and I can speak Spanish in different situations for different purposes. And I can speak Idiar Putonghua in different situations for different purposes, but only a little, right? So that's Mandarin. But so we have different languages for different purposes, and these students know when and how to use their multiple languages. That's an asset that we should build on. Another asset they bring is this bicultural or multicultural asset. And what that means is that they are able to maneuver between different cultural situations, their community culture, their home culture, their school culture. When they go to their family's home culture, maybe they have never even been born, they weren't born there, they may not have traveled there, but because of their environment, they're able to adapt to that country's culture fairly quickly. So again, building on that as an asset. A third is that these students are able to navigate multiple complex context fluidly. They can translanguage, meaning they're going to use a little bit of this language and a little bit of that language in academic and social situations. They move in and out of their multiple languages fluidly. That is a complex skill. They adapt to the different home and school expectations very rapidly. And so we want to build on that complexity that they have, that ability, and let them know that is a skill, that is a gift. That many of us, if you know, like traveling, you go, man, I don't feel comfortable in this environment. These students are able to make that happen. So keeping that in mind as asset-based rather than the many, many descriptors that you saw in the chat blast. Let's switch the frame and say, what are our assets? Because that's going to be the foundation for where we go in the ABCs. So this is really the important quote, that long-term English learners are not students lacking language, but emergent bilinguals with a repertoire that allows them to manage multiple languages and contexts in ways that are complex and dynamic, constantly changing. This comes from Nelson Flores, Tatiana Klein, and Kate Menken out of New York. This paper that I'm citing is in your Padlet, and I will give you the QR code and bit.ly for that Padlet right at the end of the official presentation before the question and answer period. So you'll have access to that and all the other resources I'm mentioning tonight. So now we have gotten a little bit of background on who is classified and why. And now we're going to apply the ABCs with one strategy for the A, the B, and the C. And our language objectives, you've already described some characteristics of LTEL in the chat box. In the next, you'll get to ask and answer questions in the chat box. So let's try the ABCs now. I've put this together to try to put together all of the research that I've done for this course that I'm working on with Kelly and this webinar. And I would say that the A is about amplify, not simplify. It's about amplifying text, content, and thinking. It's about making it more, maybe with comprehension, those visuals that I've mentioned, with the icons, all the things that we can do to amplify it, but not simplify it. Many of our LTELs are kind of stuck, as that was one of the words, in programming that doesn't fit their needs. And that might be a reason why they are not making the progress that we would hope for. So, one of the questions that came in before the webinar was, where do I find modified text? I'm actually not going to give a resource for that because our long-term English learners, for the most part, can decode text. They have been in the system a long time, and one reason they may be stuck, as the words came up in the chat box, is because they haven't had exposure to texts that enable them to read at grade level, that challenge them to read at grade level with amplification. We're going to learn one strategy on how to amplify text tonight, and there's lots more, but one tonight. The B of ABC is about building literacy, because that is one of the key areas that the majority of our long-term English learners need support with, is literacy, reading and writing, across the content area through collaborative structures. And this answers a lot of the other questions that came in tonight before the webinar. And that was, how do we get every teacher on board? I'm so glad the question came up, because that is the #1 recommendation from all of the program recommendations from California to New York, is about making every teacher in your school a language teacher. And if we can build literacy through the content areas, through math and science and social studies, they can see growth in their literacy skills. And then the collaborative structures is the other question that came in around how to build oral language. We build it with a structure that engages them in academic discussion. And Jeff Sweers is the main advocate of this in many of his books. And I will show you one structure tonight that can support students with academic reading across the content. So in the C category is to connect. We have to connect to our students' background knowledge, to their family and community, to their culture, to their linguistic and experiential assets. How is our curriculum providing windows and mirrors? Do they see themselves in our schools? Are our students who are long-term learners actually feeling like they are recognized, acknowledged, and valued in the curriculum? You saw in that first slide about how to introduce text that I mentioned the text Ephraim divided as a short story that could be one that they're reading about people like themselves often. Are we providing that? Are we making the curriculum something that our students can connect to? Are we also reaching out to their families and getting their families involved? Are we reaching out to their wider community, building on what they bring? Do we know what their cultural, linguistic, and experiential assets are? We're going to talk about one strategy for that tonight. There are so many, and if you want more just on this community, family connection, Kelly Ryder's organization, English Learner Portal, also offers a 5-hour course just on that with Laura Gardner that I can recommend. Okay, let's see what's one strategy for amplifying the text. This strategy, I'm going to have you build yourselves, which is another strategy. It's that constructivist approach. I'm going to show you a text from, it's called Volcanoes from Michael George from 1993. I chose this, one, because I'm married to a geologist, and two, because I live in Western Colorado in volcanic mountain territory. So we're going to read a little bit about volcanoes. I'll show you the text in a moment, and I'm going to be quiet. If you're reading on your phone, you may have to blow it up. I'm going to let you read the text. As you're reading, think about how could you amplify, meaning don't simplify any words, don't take any words off, but how could you make the text more comprehensible for those long-term learners who already know how to decode the text, okay? They know how to sound things out, but they may not comprehend. Here's the text, I'll be quiet, you think about how you could change it. All right, you may or may not be done reading, but I think you've gotten far enough to have some ideas. We're going to do another chat blast, which means don't hit return yet. The question is, what could you do to amplify, not simplify the text? You have to keep all the words the same, but what would help comprehension? So type an idea in the chat box, but don't hit return. All right, it's time to 1, 2, 3, hit return. What could you do? Love, love, love it. You guys know how to engineer a text. This is awesome. I'm going to say that the video on volcanoes first, absolutely. In fact, you could hyperlink it if this is on a virtual classroom document or if they're in class reading it virtually. You could hyperlink a video. You could highlight and bold. You could add images. You could color code. Woo, woo. You could pre-teach the vocab. You could do, let's see, somebody had bullets. I want to talk about that. Illustrations, super, all right? These are all fabulous ideas, and what you have just come up with is something called engineering the text. I'm gonna give you the model that I came up with. This is an engineered text. The words are exactly the same. You'll notice what I've done. First, I chunked the text. So the first paragraph is kind of its own thing, and the second paragraph is its own thing. I gave some space on the outside so they could annotate and make notes. I added a question ahead of each paragraph. Now, it could be a section instead of a paragraph. You could also just do it as a heading. But I ask a question so they know what to focus on in that paragraph. I added an infographic about the data, the 600 active volcanoes. I added a picture about the myth, and I gave the word glossed story instead of myth, pointed out what an eruption is. The part about the ancient people believing in the volcanoes, I translated antepasados, okay, so that they didn't have to worry about looking up ancestors or ancient, antiguos. But words like intrigued and myths, I just gave an easier word, but kept the word intrigued and myth. This is what Andrea Honigsfeld calls engineered text. Now, one of the things that came up several times in the chat box that I wanted to address is called as bullet points. And many of you suggested that. That is a common strategy, but what Maneka Brooks found in her book that I've mentioned already about transforming literacy for long-term English learners, it came out this year. She sat with long-term English learners in a school and shadowed them for a year. And she found that in science and social, I think it was science and social studies class, the students never actually read text. They only read bullet points. And the teachers, with all good intentions, were trying to support that text. And with all good intentions, they turned complex content text into bullet points. But the students weren't able to move in literacy because they were never given this rich opportunity. So I'm going to challenge you on the bullet point idea to reduce the amount that we use bullet points and give kids more opportunity to access complex text. Andrea Honigsfeld calls this engineering the text in her book, Growing Language and Literacy. And here are 5 key things that you can do. Chunking the text into smaller, manageable passages, asking those guiding questions or providing headings, adding visuals with a caption, just like you saw, or an infographic, adding a glossary or translation of key terms, like we did both, right? The blue was the glossary, the translation, that's translanguaging or translation of other key terms. Leaving that wider margin and possibly enlarging the text for student notes. These are 5, 6 ways of really making the text amplified while keeping the complexity. There's one idea for amplification. There are lots more that I cover in the 5-hour course that I'll tell you about. For B, building literacy through collaborative structures across the curriculum, I'm going to take this quote from Margarita Calderon and Sean Slack in their book, Teaching Reading to English Learners, grades 6 to 12. Now, the whole book is not just about long-term learners, but that's who the majority of the secondary students are. And that's the focus of this session. I know there were questions about students with interrupted formal education and students with limited formal education. That's really not the focus here of who our long-term learners are that I'm focusing on. These are students that have been in the system for that 5 or 6 years consecutively. So their quote, is that collaborative text-based reading engages students with text and rich discussions. Notice the words collaborative and discussion. This answers one of the questions that came in before the session on building students' oral language. Absolutely essential, and this next practice, this next strategy is going to help you with that. Now, I know that many of you do something on partner reading. There are as many different ways to partner read as there are partners. So I'm going to give you one possibility that's pretty easy to implement and can be done in a virtual environment. And that is where partner A would read the text or paragraph, short chunk of text aloud. Partner B is going to either ask a question, make a connection, or paraphrase that passage, like summarize it. It's very similar to reciprocal teaching if you're familiar with that, but just at an easier level, not a whole team level, just a partner level. And then partner A and B actually discuss the answer to the question or the connection or the paraphrase together and switch roles. Now, because we're in a webinar and we're not totally interactive, I'm going to be partner A. And I will read the text out loud this time. This text is about what we're talking about. It's about our long-term English learners and reading and collaborative reading. While I'm reading, you're going to be thinking about that question, the connection, or the paraphrase that you might give back to me. Okay? Again, it's a chat blast. So you don't take someone else's idea. Everybody gets a chance, an equal chance. Just hang on until I say hit return. All right, so here is the passage. I need to give you a support first. This would be in your hands as a support card as you're going, and I'm going to give you your 3 roles. Like, here it is, asking a question, and I might give ideas. You could ask about vocab or a phrase or a concept. You can clarify or start with I wonder. So I'm giving support for asking a question. I could give support with how to connect. You could connect to another text. You could connect to an idea, your background knowledge, and then you want to ask if your partner had a similar connection. And then I might give this final support around how to summarize. It's basically the repeat button, right, or the refresh button. It's that summarize the passage for your partner and ask if your partner had a different understanding. All right, ready? Your partner B, you're getting ready to type in the box either a question, a connection, or a summarization It's hard in the chat box for that one. And I'll read partner A. Here we go. In the most effective classrooms, student talk is more prevalent than educator talk, and active student collaboration abounds. Long-term English learners typically are not risk takers in class. They need daily structured opportunities, invitation, and support to share responses and collaborate with peers and present ideas. Team building, an important tool, is particularly critical at the beginning of the semester. This comes from Lori Olson in her guide, Meeting the Needs of Long-Term English Learners, and she's out of California. All right, hold on. Do one of those three things as my partner B. And hit it. Oh, these are great. I'm going to go with the why LTELs are so quiet in class and are LTELs really not risk takers. There's so many. These are great questions that we could go further discussion. If you have seen the book by Ivania Soto, it's called ELL Shadowing, a tool or a catalyst for change. It talks of it as a protocol that Ivania Soto has used where she shadows mostly long-term English learners in the classroom, and they code every time the student speaks and every time they're listening, reading, or writing. Now, I have worked with the shadowing document and made it a little bit more specific, but you might challenge your students to ask a factual question in the pink box, a predictive question. If you find that they're just going, what is this? What is that? If they're constantly in the pink box, you might challenge them to ask a question in the green box or the analytical box. And I generally don't provide this right away for my long-term English learners because we tend to support too much before we actually let them have a chance to grapple with it. So I would recommend that you wait, you observe, right? If they need the support, you provide it. So once they're engaged in the content, we're monitoring and saying, oh, they need support with asking really good questions. All right, so the C. How do we connect to students' background knowledge, their family, their community, the students' linguistic, cultural, and experiential assets? The big tip here is around some kind of survey to get to know them better. The first survey that I'm going to show you is on the Padlet that you'll get in just a moment. And that is coming from New York. And this one is really specific. You'll see it's around languages they speak at home and with their friends, and are they more comfortable in English or in both language, home language, or both equally? Would they rather read or write in English or the home language, and why? You're making them metalinguistic. You're making them aware of their own language use through this questioning itself. What I love about this, and here's the reference, and you'll see this on the Padlet, it's from the University of New York, and it's from that framework for educating long-term English learners, grades 6 to 12. Again, that same group of Kate Menken and Tatiana Klein with Laura Asensio Moreno. But what I love about this is you're really getting into language with the kids. Now, some teachers have turned some of this into like a Google form and get the kids to fill it out. Notice what this colleague of mine in high school did. She gave a link to all the activities and clubs that the school has available for the students and said, you know, maybe what might you be interested in? Could they be interested in something like this? And then, hey, check this link out and tell me what you might want to do. And then she can help facilitate that possibly. She also asks about holidays and what their hopes and dreams are. What we find with a lot of the research that's out there recently is that many long-term English learners plan to go to college, have high aspirations, and don't actually know that they are not in the courses that will lead them in that direction. So this is valuable information as well. And then finally, what I love on this Google Doc or Google form is that the teacher asks about seating preference if you're face-to-face or learning preference. And I think these questions can really get at some background for the kids that we can work with then in the classroom. So that was one strategy for amplifying, one strategy for building literacy, and one strategy for connecting with our students and connecting to their strengths and their assets. There's the Padlet that I promised you. The bit.ly is bit.ly/LTEL, all caps, and then Padlet, LTEL Padlet. The password is LTEL, all caps. And if you have your iPhone out or you want to take a picture or a screenshot, that is the QR code. There are lots of resources in that Padlet that I've cited in this webinar and more, because it's the same Padlet I will be using for this 5-hour course. So if you want more than what I was able to provide in 36 minutes here tonight, I would love to see you in this 5-hour mini course. The 5-hour training is completely asynchronous and on your own time. So it's self-paced. You do it when you have time. There are videos and readings and activities, and it's all practical and things that will hopefully help you work better with your long-term English learners. It's in collaboration with Kelly at EnglishLearnerPortal.com, and that's where you can find this training. We open the course in 1 week from tonight, which is super exciting. And so you are welcome to sign up, but you don't have to start 1 week from tonight, so don't panic. You have access to the course for a whole year. And it would be great if you wanted to get a cohort together. You say, you know what, I've got 4 colleagues and we want to do this course together, 4 or 5 colleagues. You can also talk to Kelly about creating a cohort, and we can start and stop that course with you, or I can have a personalized cohort for you where I'm interacting with you more. And then I'd finally like to just end this portion of it with the ABCs, a different one. Please advocate for these bilingual children. Please advocate for them, because they need us to say, you can, you have assets, you are not all those negative things that we listed. You are not a sum of your deficits, but all of these assets that I have shared with you tonight. So really, this is my big plea for you. And now I would like to just go to some of the questions that have come in. Somebody asked about where I engineered the text. I just did it on my own. I don't know of a website. Someone shared the Rewordify. The only difference with Rewordify is that it will Rewordify kind of everything, and you may have to pick and choose. Like, you don't need all those words Rewordified. Those were some of the things that I picked out as I was scanning. Kelly, did you have anything else that I missed just from so far? And then I'll talk about the things that came in before the webinar.
I don't think so. I think you caught the ones that I saw go by. I'm just answering the one right now. If you want to set up cohorts for the course with your own timeline, for your district, then email me at info@EnglishLearnerPortal.com, and we can set that up for you. Or any questions you have about purchase, orders, enrollment, all of that. Email me, I'll stick that in the chat box. But we'll let Beth answer some more questions.
Super. And I did have a request for that bit.ly QR code, and it is on the screen again for you. The bit.ly again is just bit.ly/LTEL Padlet. So lots in there. So the questions that came in before the webinar, when you signed up, there was a space. Did you want to ask any questions? And I put them into topics. And it was really interesting because the topics were right around the recommendations for working with English language learners. There were about 7 questions on how do we work with our content teachers to support them with working with English language learners, and how can we leverage all teachers. So great questions on that. I am going to share some ideas, 2 quickies. One is co-teaching, and that's at the program level. If you think about why long-term English language learners get to that stage, it's because they may be a product of some of the policies we have in place at our school or at the state level or at the school level, you know, state, federal, or school level. It could be a policy that just isn't working for this very diverse group of students. It could be a program, and I would suggest that co-teaching falls in the program. If we are not leveraging the power of our English language development specialists through some kind of co-teaching, then we are missing out on a program that can totally support this group in a way that no other program can. So I would put that at a program level. And then there are some practices. And everything I shared with you tonight, the 3 things are at the practice level, because it's things that anyone can do in the classroom. So you really have to decide, what is your locus of control when you're looking at, are LTELs a product of one of these 3 or all 3? You have to say, what's my locus of control? What can I do? And which ring does this fit into? So co-teaching is in that program and practice ring. And if you can do it, even at a small scale, I highly encourage it. Andrea Honigsfeld is your go-to for co-teaching for our long-term English learners. Another big area that came up was around the prevention of long-term English learners. And that is, again, in that programming and policy and practice, it's all 3 rings coming together. One of them, of course, is that all teachers are language and literacy teachers, and we're following that. But if you could add language objectives to your content objectives in addition to co-teaching, I really think that's going to make a difference, because you're focused on language in addition to just your content. And that can be a prevention. So I spent the day yesterday in an elementary school, and we were working on exactly this, because the majority of the students at the elementary school in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade were already at that high intermediate, depending on your school and your state, what language acquisition test you use. They were at the 3 to 4 plus stage, but not yet exited. And all teachers were in on focusing, what's the next step? How do I prevent them from becoming long-term? Another way to prevent that is by not over-supporting, instead amplifying text. Questions about remote learning? Everything I showed you tonight can be done remotely. So certainly you can do a version of partner reading. You can amplify the text. That can be done in your Google Classroom. In fact, that example came from a Google Classroom that I was running this summer. And then getting to know them, I showed you Google Forms that teachers use to get to know their students. Breakout rooms are a possibility as a differentiation for that, for remote learning. Oral language development, I hit on some of that. Big questions around special education and how to manage your English language development classes. The recommendations on that, and I am going to stop the share and just talk for a moment and then look at the chat box. But the recommendations around the English language development block for our long-term English learners are to make their own class. This is not the time to put a long-term English learner in with your newcomers. They need their own specialized ELD class, and generally it's focused on literacy, but you have to look at their scores. Some of them may need more of that focus on oral language development. Also connecting what you do in that ELD class with what they have in their content area. Larry Ferlazzo, he's prolific in the field in the United States. He's out of California. He teaches in the International Baccalaureate program, and his long-term English learners are in IB courses, as they should be. When I worked at the international school in Bavaria and in Munich, almost all of my students did super well on the International Baccalaureate assessments and the tests, and they were in my language development class. It's called English B, and they did well in that too. So they are super capable if we give them the opportunity and the access to these courses. And then finally, about special ed. So there's 2 things that I want to mention about special ed before we close tonight and respect your time, is that one, they could be a product of the fact that they have unmet special learning needs. It is possible that because of the hesitancy to identify English language learners early on, because, well, they're English learners and so we shouldn't test them, and some schools still have the I would say, ineffective practice of saying no testing in special ed for 2 years or 3 years, we may have missed a need. That is a possibility. The other possibility is the flip side, is that special ed is becoming the default intervention for our long-term English learners, when in reality, they're just on the trajectory, and it's a natural, normal, 10-year process. We know now from long-term research that has been going on that kids that enter our system very young, like kindergarten to preschool, in an all-English environment without the home language support or development, they actually take longer to acquire English at grade level than students who come in 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th grade. It takes them longer because they haven't had a strong foundation in their home language. And for research on that, I have linked in the Padlet under the translanguaging column a fabulous podcast, and it's all scripted out podcast from my friend and colleague, Eowyn Crisfield. She's out of London, and it just posted today. I was super excited. I'm like, yay, Eowyn, right in time. So it's all about how without that strong foundation, it actually takes learners who start in our system very young longer than those that come with de facto bilingual ed. They're coming from whatever country and they're already literate in their home language. They learn faster than those that start in kindergarten. So any other real quick questions that have come up? Kelly, you've been monitoring.
Not that I've seen so far. Lots of thank yous for all the good information. I haven't seen any questions, so if you have any, go right ahead.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. It has been such a joy working with you. I would love to see you guys in the 5-hour course. And again, self-paced, all asynchronous, no requirements. If you want a 5-hour badge, all you have to do is there's an activity choice. I have 4 choices for every module. So you make something that works for you and your context, and it should take you like 15, 20 minutes, but it's like create a survey to give to your kids, like something really practical for each of those modules. So if that's something you'd like to learn more about, I would love to see you there. And I thank you so much for dedicating your time either tonight or if you're in Beijing, tomorrow morning. Thank you, Lisa. Good to see you. Take care, guys. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Beth, for joining us and for planning such good ideas for us. We're so happy to have you here.